Scottish entertainment every night. Traditional Scottish.
In 1939, I had one of my formative experiences. I was on the beach at Portobello. The German Luftwaffe flew in a blue, blue, blue sky towards the upper reaches of the Firth of Forth. And when they returned, there was a great deal of machine gun fire coming from the Spitfire planes, which were actually causing one of the bombers to be in its death throes. I didn't realize, of course, that the bullets from that Spitfire were directing themselves towards the plane, but also towards my bare legs. I was a 9-year-old child, and I can remember very clearly that the bullets spluttered into the wet sand, just a few inches from my toes.
Rosyth echoes to slow feet as the men of the Royal Navy who lost their lives in the air raid over the Firth of Forth are carried to their last rest. British sailors who served their country well, but fate decreed that in the defense of their homeland they should lose their lives. In honor and with gratitude, we shall remember them.
Why is this important? Well, it developed my sense of internationalism. I didn't see them as enemies, especially as these two pilots were very young. One was 17 and one was 20. But also, this experience engendered a deep hostility to the idea of war and reinforced my belief in the redemptive power of all the arts.
And in Edinburgh, 2 of the young German airmen who were shot down are paid full military honors by the Royal Air Force. In death, there is no hatred for them. They too served their own country and died bravely. In the words of the chaplain, may they now find the peace that was denied them on earth.
With my dear mother and father, I remember once a conversation which ended up me having to explain why I thought I wanted to study art at art school. And they agreed with me when I said I would like to become a professional artist. Therefore, I must go to an art school. It's a very good one in Edinburgh. And they asked me, why the language of art? And I said, I remember this, even then, when I was so young, I said, it's because it's the language of love.
Language of love. Have you said those were your ideals that you had?
Yeah.
And then tell me what you feel has happened now then with the art world. How has it lost its way in some way, would you say?
And in fact, I think I could quote Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Right.
There is corruption in the palace of the king. I keep thinking of the way in which John Keats, with his poetic soul, said clearly, all you need to know in this world is that truth is beauty and beauty is truth. And he said you don't need to know anything else. And what is the one language which expresses both beauty and truth. It's not the language of the politician. It's not the language of the businessman. It's not the language of the lawyer or the doctor. It's the language of the artist.
So would words like timelessness come into it?
I think they would.
Transcendence? Are those all words that are there to describe the art that you're trying to, that, you know, those ideals that you first had at the beginning of the
We all
Edinburgh
need to be
Fringe?
astonished. We all need to be amazed. We all need to be reassured. We all need to touch something which is not about the limitations of time as we experience it in a linear way. All art is our dream of the eternal, truths which don't change.
Yes.
With the ending of the war came another key experience. It happened in the year 1947, and it was the founding of the Edinburgh International Festival of All the Arts. I couldn't believe the art on the scale and on the level that I experienced it at that first festival. It was important, not only for healing the wounds of war, it was about the flowering of the human spirit. It is my view that something has gone seriously wrong with our cultural heritage. For me, the fate of the Edinburgh Festival is symbolic of our cultural decline.
The city itself was a great work of historical art. To be in a place that's so fantastic and seeing new work that's fantastic is kind of unique. It was a conglomeration of the best in the arts and the most entertaining, so that people were grasped by the arts and thrilled by the arts. Anyway, I came up, first of all, to see things, and then I came up as one of the first fringes, because what happened was that the festival was so strong, the feeling in Edinburgh, other people wanted to come along and perform at the same time as the official festival. It was gorgeous. And I came up when I'd just finished the Old Vic School, and I came up with an Oxford theatre group, and we played in Riddle's Court on the Royal Mile. But down the street was Joan Littlewood with her great theatre workshop playing a play, and down another street was La Mama from New York. They were doing the best business because they were doing a play about a young man who fell in love with a pig. And this got denounced by people on the city, and as a result became the biggest box office on or off the official festival.
I can still absolutely vividly remember the first time I realised that I loved contemporary modern art, not simply the books of Van Gogh and Matisse and so forth that I've been introduced to as a small boy, or the paintings on people's walls, but actually stuff that was being made now and was abstract. There was an exhibition in the Royal Botanic Gardens of Barbara Hepworth's work.
Oh my goodness.
And there were scores of...
At the Edinburgh Festival?
At the Edinburgh Festival, part of the Edinburgh Festival. And there were scores of Hepworth sculptures placed amongst the plants and the lawns and the landscapes of the Royal Botanic Gardens. And I can remember being aged about 13 or 14, only that, and getting up first thing in the morning from the flat I was staying in, walking down to the Botanic Gardens, and then spending the rest of the day in a kind of dazed admiration, just knocked sideways by this extraordinary sculpture. And this was one of those moments, I didn't know that I liked abstract sculpture. I'd never really seen much before. I didn't know what it was. Yeah. But when I saw it, I knew this is part of the world that I want to inhabit for the rest of my life on the planet. And so it has been.
The early Edinburgh festivals possessed an artistic and intellectual quality that is rarely evident now. The world-class Writers' Conference of 1962 and, of course, the Playwrights' Conference of 1963 are examples of the synergy created by the presence of so many leading writers in the city of Edinburgh. Another example would perhaps be the birth of Edinburgh's Traverse Theatre. One of the co-founders of the Traverse Theatre was ex-US serviceman Jim Haynes. And he, along with the controversial publisher and patron of all the arts, John Calder, proved to be the driving forces behind the writers' conferences. The first took place as part of the official Edinburgh Festival of 1962, and that brought the world's great novelists to Edinburgh. The second was entitled the Playwrights' Conference. There were over 70 authors attracted to Edinburgh on the first Festival of Literature. They involved the world-recognized writers Norman Mailer, Alexander Trocchi, Mary McCarthy. But unlike today's book festival, where writers appear for a couple of hours to essentially publicize their wares, these authors spent an entire week in each other's company, flighting and jousting and generating huge creative energy, involved in all sorts of arguments. Jim Haynes, of course, went on to create the International Times. He was obliged to leave Edinburgh, sadly, and he became a cultural animateur in Paris, and thankfully we have remained friends to this very day.
First was the Russian poet. I introduced the Russian poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko to Edinburgh.
I remember he drank a whole bottle of whiskey in my flat and you brought him to see me.
Yeah. We had a big event built around him, and that reinforced the idea that we needed a literary element to the festival.
Yeah.
So John and I and Sonia Orwell and others created the 1962 Writers' Conference.
And did Lord Harwood agree?
Lord Harwood agreed. He said, the only thing you must do is not lose money. And we didn't. We broke even, I think, between ticket sales and what have you.
What kind of writers came here?
We had 70 novelists from all over the world. The stars were really Henry Miller and Lawrence Durrell and Norman Mailer and Mary McCarthy, and then later William Burroughs. And as part of the same 62 festival. And it
what about Trocchi?
Yeah, Trocchi and Hugh McDermott were elements. They actually had head-to-head encounter, which was quite a little fractious. I mean, they went to each other's throat.
Was there any blood?
No blood was spilled, but probably was close.
It was close, yeah. Now, what about the difference between that concept of a writers' conference and the now highly popular book festival? What's the difference?
The big difference is that we had 70 writers on the stage, and all at one time for a week, and every night we had a party somewhere. So we were all together for a week, 70 writers, and it was much more. It was in many ways much more fun. People bonded, the writers bonded with each other or fought with each other or whatever.
Yeah.
And then later we had the drama conference, which was more than 100
Next
people.
year.
The following year, 63, we had all kinds of theater people from all over. We had Joan Littlewood, we had even, who's a great actor, Sir Laurence Olivier, and Peter Brook, and yeah.
It was a happening. And what was the key moment of truth in the happening that nearly caused the Edinburgh Festival to be questioned to its very roots? What was it?
Well, one of the events was the baby doll. What's her name? The actress Carol Baker. Played baby doll in some famous movie. And up on the roof, there were people crawling on the roof. So if you looked up at the roof, you saw strange figures like
Through the glass roof.
through the glass roof. But if you happen to look straight ahead, if you were timing your vision at the right moment, you saw a woman who was without her clothes on, and she was rolled across this gallery on some kind of trolley, and
It's usually pulled with a rope. Remember that?
and so she didn't move, and technically that was totally legal in British theater. You could be nude as long as you didn't move. But she was pulled across and if you blinked, you would have missed the whole thing. But later, all the photographers from the popular press went round the back in dressing room and started taking pictures of her. And of course, they used those pictures in the newspaper, nude happening
In Edinburgh.
And the Lord Provost was extremely upset. And the following year, we were going to have a poetry conference.
Yes, that would have been wonderful.
And he said, no more conferences involving John Calder or Jim Haynes. So
No, they're too dangerous.
too
We
dangerous.
can't have them destroying the puritanical image
Of the city.
Yeah, because Edinburgh was the British version of Boston, isn't that right?
Exactly.
According to Thomas Lehrer.
Yeah.
Tom Lehrer. Would you think that particular conference, the two conferences, were high points in the whole history of the 71-year-old Edinburgh Festival? Do you regard these as high points? Huge contributions.
Yeah, I think so. They definitely were world events. I mean, people talked about them literally all over Australia, America, France, everywhere. They were talked about. They're still talked about. In fact, there's a young woman two young women from Glasgow who made a book about the 1962 Writers' Conference, which is a glorious little book, I must say. They did a great job.
This is where the paperback bookshop was. This is where the real spirit of the Edinburgh Festival existed. This is where Henry Miller, Edward Darby, John Calder, they all gathered here. What a contrast the festival is now with its early years. Those years that were a source of inspiration to me. Aside from the great artists and performers whose nights we will never see again, Edinburgh came alive on every level, culturally, spiritually. It still comes alive now, but for strictly commercial reasons. This is not the book festival. This is for the people. This is the people's fringe festival. If you're wanting to put on very serious theatre, for example, you are in competition with the overwhelming power of the world of the stand-up comic. That's what the general public prefer. I feel sorry for the present director of the official festival, because he has to make sure that there's an audience, and he can't take too many risks. In fact, he can't take any risks. And I can guarantee that everybody who's billed in the official program is a world-recognized success story.
The problem is it became too successful. In its greatest days, this was quite tough, challenging. New music, new art. They were opening people to things that you really had to work hard at. But as the festival has become such a fantastic money spinner, the people renting their places on Airbnb, the restaurateurs, the pubs, all the rest of it, lots of people making a lot of money at the Edinburgh Festival. And once your main aim is to get as many people into the city, spending as much money as possible. Of course, what you do is you give them the easy stuff. That's the sweet sort of sticky. Here's some nice easy comedy. Here's some easy to absorb popular drama. Here's some easy films. Here's some nice tuneful, familiar melodic music for you. And therefore, the ambition to be a really, really cutting edge, make you think harder about who you are kind of event starts to fall down the batting order.
Well, I thought it was a tragedy that the fringe that had started with such high quality work was gradually being, it was covered with a big eider down of whoever wanted to come up and make a profit by telling a few jokes. And you couldn't rent a theatre anymore for a serious play like Tom Stoppard did. His first play was done at the Edinburgh Festival on the Fringe.
You mean to say, God, that was one of the high points of my life.
Rosencrantz and Juliet.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
And they said,
on the Fringe.
yeah.
And it was an Oxford.
Those sort of things, where that was done, you couldn't do that anymore because they could sell the space by our segments to somebody to stand up and say a few jokes. And I got very heady. I'm not against jokes. In fact, I'm considered a very vulgar joke maker in the theatre. But I just felt that nobody who was poor and creating something for the first time could get a look in. So I rather said one day, oh, this is becoming a sort of Coney Island amusement park, the Fringe.
Yeah.
And it's sad, and everybody got very hysterical about it.
Yeah.
But it was true. And now it's still very difficult for somebody who's got a serious show to exist and cover the costs on the Fringe. And of course it's much easier if somebody's got a few jokes to tell. They don't have any scenery, they don't have any costumes, and they just get in and get out again.
The whole idea is entertainment.
Entertainment.
And the Fringe is about entertainment.
Well, except, I mean, yes, it is, but it's also got quite political, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the last couple of years, the nature of some of the theatre on the Fringe is really been extremely rightly relevant and pretty political, well, very political.
But when the festival began, there were no prizes for anyone offered to anyone on the Fringe. The concept of a prize being given to someone on the Fringe, happened when the Perrier Award developed. Yeah. But now...
That's probably a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah. Now it's all about, certainly, prizes. If you win the Festival Comedy Prize, you're supposed to be launching yourself on a great career. Mainly
you are. I mean, I went to see Ollie and Stan, or Stan and Ollie last week.
A film?
This wonderful film about Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
Which is a thing of beauty, really. But the lead, the man playing Stan Laurel, is Steve Coogan. When you read, I mean, Coogan won the Perrier Award, I think couldn't have been the 80s, could it? But maybe early 90s.
Yeah.
And I mean, got himself launched. So many names these days were launched.
Well, it's the dominant factor, and the money that comes in is considerable, and the Edinburgh Festival itself...
To the city, not to the arts in the city. I mean, to the city.
Well, now it's a special kind of Fringe that didn't exist in the original.
Yes, and a lot of it is exceedingly commercial, isn't it?
It's 100%.
Well, apart from the wonderful group of people who sort of decide 6 months before that they'd like to go and do something on the Fringe, and they scrape up the money and perform in a 30-seat basement to 3 people. But I mean, there's still people, lovely people like that, believing in creativity and wanting to show something to somebody. But I mean, a huge part of the Fringe is commercially driven. I mean, you only need to look at the brochure to see what a fat wad of paper is devoted to comedy.
So there are still today brave, creative souls, and they're willing to put their wares forward in the money-driven marketplace of the Edinburgh Festival fringe. But every year it gets harder for them to be noticed because they are buried under a mountain of expensive marketing for the latest comedy sensation. So who is to blame? Certainly not the artists, that's for sure. A whole superstructure of promoters, curators, and general bureaucrats of the arts now manage the spaces available for artistic expression. Gone are the days of really knowledgeable patrons who can encourage creative talent. The market is certainly king nowadays. It is driven in the private sector by the need to make money, and in the public sector aimed at the minds of the bureaucrats. And central to the process in both sectors are curators. The curatorial world dominates the world of the artists. To discuss this phenomenon, I was fortunate to meet the Daily Telegraph art critic Mark Hudson and the former director of the National Portrait Gallery, Sandy Nairn. I met them in the grounds of one of Britain's sacred artistic spaces, Tate Britain, on the banks of the Thames, in the very heart of London.
Well, I have to say, I do tend to spit whenever I use the word curator, because I think wasn't it Marcel Duchamp who said that the fourth dimension of art is the role of the spectator. Unfortunately, it's actually become the role of the curator. The curator has taken over from the spectator, so everything is mediated by this class of people of whom we're creating ever more. But at the same time, I suppose everybody's becoming a kind of curator. That'd be a nice thought, but I actually don't think they are. They don't have the power of curators to make and break, to change our minds about things. But the problem with curators is that they tend, although they're not all, we have great curators, and we have absolutely magnificent curators, but generally they like art historians and academics in general, they are only interested in things that have already been endorsed by other curators, and they're interested in impressing other curators.
I think there are many curators. Ricky, I know you dismissed, but I think there are actually many who really care about the things you care about too, about connectedness, about education, about that. There are. The other side of it is that, like everybody else, as referred, they're in an art world that is so pressurized by the financial, by the wealth of what exchanges in and around the art world. So I think it's very, very tough. I'm all for having, if you like, better balance. I want great curatorship, but of course I also want great spectatorship. I want everybody to feel that they have some power in what they love and what they care about and how they can express that. And I think some of our museums and galleries have taken inspiration, Ricky, from you and others, and realised that you do try and make a more open situation. And we feel that in some places. And I also think that we have actually, you know, if we're looking for good news, it is that we still see lots of little independent spaces, lots of little alternates, always coming and going, of artists. You know, we've seen that across generations of artists in the end will find what they want to do.
Yes,
in the end, artists will not just be defined by curators. But they will find other ways.
When art is controlled by market forces and and it has to be associated with tourism, and entertainment and leisure, when does art become a form of pollution? Now, what I'm interested in is that art is a sacred language. It actually is the only language we have, Boyce used to say this, which expresses our capacity to love. How the hell can we get that across? And then, if that is the case, is it reserved only for the person who's got the qualification? I'm talking about There's a system now which exists.
But I think we see lots of kids coming through who find their own ways around that, who find their own forms of resistance.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I think that when I see, I don't know, when I go, look at a Tate Modern, or I look at let's actually think better than that. If I go to Chisenhale, one of the independent spaces, there are artists that will turn up there who I know nothing about. Yeah. And yet there'll be something, a little spark, and I think that's a pretty open situation. I don't think anybody goes in there thinking they're being told anything very much.
Yeah. I agree with
you.
I
think we still have, if you like, putting aside the museums, let's be clearer, there's still often an independence. I mean, who won the Turner Prizes last year? Lubaina Himid. I mean, I worked with Lubaina when she was a kid, back in the 80s, and she was as sparky and spirited then as she still is now. What's she really been doing across these years? She's been teaching. She's been a fantastic teacher in Lancaster. That's where she's been working, well away from the mainstream of the art world. Yeah, hugely involved in black politics, greatly involved in feminism, but actually inspiring lots of younger artists.
That was a good
and
idea.
Now she wins the Turner Prize. And actually, she's as young as she ever was. I don't think she's any different now than she was 30 years ago.
Do you think it's a good idea that an artist should win a prize? I mean,
not in itself. No, the prize has no value. But it means there's a moment of attentiveness. Then there's a different kind of engagement. And, she gets a different kind of opportunity.
Talking of curators, I personally would love to curate the ultimate Richard Demarco exhibition, which will feel like taking part in one of those mass happenings in the early 70s. When you walk in, you will walk through that experience in all its forms. And you will meet Boyce, you will meet Ricky, you'll meet all these other extraordinary characters. That is the one exhibition I would like to curate.
Joking apart, there is certainly a sinister side to the forces controlling all the arts in our present-day world. When the authorities get involved, the consequences can be very serious. I found this out to my own cost when I was helping Joseph Boyce in his attack, I suppose that's the word, against the Scottish government's treatment of a convicted murderer, Jimmy Ball. This was in the year 1980, and Joseph Boyce was in Edinburgh because he was making one of the most extraordinary exhibitions, together with a lecture series, in which he was extolling the virtues of the special unit as an experimental place in Her Majesty's prison, Barlinnie. Jimmy Ball was being forced, after 7 years of exemplary life as a creative person, as a writer, as a sculptor, he was being forced out of the special unit and obliged to be part of the normal system in a prison in Edinburgh. And Boyce, of course, was outraged. He was prepared to question the decision to do this, and he thought that Jimmy Ball was now in a fit state to return to society. Of course, Boyce knew all about the business of confronting the authorities, and he himself had lost his job as teacher in the art academy in Dusseldorf because of his own personal conflict with college authorities. But this great German artist, probably the most influential of his generation, wasn't going to lie down and take his punishment. And in fact, he was reinstated eventually after years by the German government, and he became a world figure. And we in Scotland benefited from his presence with some of the most amazing artworks ever created by 20th century artists. One in particular took place on Rannoch Moor it was all about his desire to create a piece of music in response to another German artist's efforts, Mendelssohn, who wrote the Hebrides Overture. Then there was the other work of art he created it was called the Three Parts Action, and this was performed in what had become, in medieval times, Edinburgh's equivalent to London's Bedlam. It was, in fact, a place where people went to die. Well, anyway, we have so much to thank Joseph Beuys for. He hated bureaucracy in all its forms. But nevertheless, my support of Beuys and Boyle got me into really hot water.
France and Paris are the great hubs of brilliant art throughout the 20th century,
Yes.
until after the war the French state decides to kind of, as it were, step in and take control,
Yes,
and
yes.
suddenly everything goes to pot, you know. I think it's really, really dangerous when you get bureaucrats in control of art. They're exactly the wrong people, and they're handing out money, and they're doling out money, and what you always get is some kind of official, therefore slightly dead and biddable art as a result of it. Artists are very clever and very shrewd, and they look at where the money is coming from a lot of the time, and they understand pretty acutely and almost instinctively what kind of art is going to go down well with the people doling out the grants and doling out the money, what's fashionable. So you get this kind of swerve, this fast swerve towards what's fashionable. And I think that's a real danger with when politics and art intersect. They should be kept separate.
The moment came for me when whatever I stood for was unacceptable to the powerhouse of the government control of the arts.
Yes.
I was condemned. I heard the words, "You have brought dishonor to the meaning of art." I thought, my goodness, what a great achievement. I must have had someone to help me. And actually, it was Joseph Beuys.
What was the thing that was really annoying them about Beuys and what you've been doing? What was it that got under people's skin?
It was because the Secretary of State for Scotland was handed a statement which was all of Beuys's doing, and I agreed to it, which was that it was a bad idea to put handcuffs back onto the wrists of Jimmy Ball, because for 7 years the special unit had worked magic, and people who were considered to be the detritus of society were revealed as creative human beings. One of them...
And Boyle, we should remind you, who was a murderer who had learned to be a sculptor and was pursuing a new life as a sculptor.
And also as a writer.
As a writer.
He became quite famous because of this one book, A Sense of Freedom.
Yes.
So I said to Beuys, when you say everyone is creative, does that include people who are near the end of their lives in a hospital? In a hospice? Does that include everyone you could imagine in prison, including murderers? People involved in a life of violence? He said yes.
What was happening in a sense is that art was actually breaking down the walls. We know that's the power of art. But it was breaking down the walls. And the authorities just couldn't cope with it. That's why there was a lot of pressure on the Arts Council, which badly affected you. But it was the most magical period you'd ever believe, because that was about art, and art making such a powerful impact in a Calvinistic society.
Yes. Yeah. They didn't understand that art was an expression of love, of respect, of the defence of freedom.
The integrity of art.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what it was about. You know, it was a truth.
Yeah, truth that had to be told.
It had to be told, and you couldn't escape. You know, if you try to divert that truth, you were moving into the realms of Stalin or some other totalitarian state.
Yeah.
And that's always the conflict, always the battle, and that's what Joseph was about.
I told him, of course, at one point, I said, you realise if you take out a court case, it's going to go to the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Because he's responsible on behalf of the Queen. I mean, it's Her Majesty's prison we're talking about. I said, you're going to lose. Nobody has ever won a case against Britannic Majesty's.
But we eventually won, because I took after Joseph done, I then applied to the European Court of Human Rights.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was a record-breaking decision about freedom of expression, and I went to Brussels to the court with my Queen's Counsel, who was a man called Anthony Lester, and
good God,
it was amazing. And just to set the scene, I mean, I goes into the court and everybody's sitting there. It's very, very civilised, and all these 4 judges are up there on the bench. Can you imagine this happening in a British court? Sitting on the bench there, and I come in and sit on my Queen's Counsel, and another guy at QC Junior called David Panic, and each of the judges come up, moved over and come over and shook hands with me, and says thank you for coming. And it was so civilised, and it was like whoa. And they says the British government have made a very bad decision, and so Joseph eventually won that through me taking it, lifting the baton from him and taking it forward.
What's the date of this?
That is, I can't remember now, but it's I think it was about 1984, 85.
Goodness gracious.
And so we won the case.
Thankfully, the world of the arts is not everywhere in decline. I want to highlight 2 examples that I consider still manage to uphold true values of artistic integrity. The first that comes to mind is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. I suppose you might be surprised that I support a project that has been widely seen as arising from political and economic motives rather than purely artistic ones. After all, this museum sprang from the need to regenerate the economy of a declining port in a poor part of northern Spain. It was supposed to encourage tourists, yes, encourage tourists, and it was intended as a symbol of regeneration for the city. Well, it managed to achieve all of that. But if it had managed only that and nothing else, it would have been an artistic failure. The Bilbao Guggenheim's actual artistic integrity is mainly due to the energy, commitment, and vision of its founding director, Juan Ignacio Vidarte, and thankfully, having steered it through its birth pangs, he is there still today. I met him whilst giving a talk. I mean, he invited me to lecture, actually, at the museum about Joseph Beuys in Scotland. And I wanted him to tell me how he managed the potential contradiction between running a successful tourist attraction, and that's what it is. It attracts over 2 million visitors to Bilbao every year, which pleases the city authorities. And at the same time, creating a space for true artistic endeavor.
I was looking at this from the perspective of having a concern about the welfare of the community in a moment where this community where we are was in a very crucial moment in its history, because it was a moment of economic recession, of political turmoil, of angst, looking into the future. And at that moment, I was convinced that change was possible, that was convinced too that that change needed to incorporate the importance of culture becoming central to any process, any transformation process. That's how this museum started to be. Yes. And I think sometimes there is a certain confusion about this, thinking, well, the way to do that is by developing an institution which is just for tourists. That's not the issue. No. The issue is that the institution needs to be for everybody. It needs to talk a language that everybody understands, and it needs to produce the possibility of an experience for the visitor that is transforming for them, whatever their background. And I think that connects with that idea of the importance of creativity for everybody, that everybody, we must think that everybody, whatever their background, their interests, their knowledge base, has an artist inside, so they can relate and engage with the art that other artists have produced.
Another example of deep cultural integrity can be found in a school deep in the heart of England. I'm thinking of Oakham School, in the market town of Oakham, in the smallest county in England, that is, in Rutlandshire. I find it, in every sense, inspirational, as a place where art is taken very seriously. Success springs at Oakham from a curriculum in which dance, music, and the visual arts are an integral part of every student's studies. This has been the case under a succession of enlightened headmasters over the last 4 decades, and they have maintained the essential balance between the arts and the sciences, and they've all taken an integrated and holistic view of the process of learning. Oakham has a most remarkable library. Not only is it well stocked with books from every discipline, but it offers the most beautiful, modern, spacious, and peaceful environment for study. The man currently responsible for this quiet and purposeful haven is the librarian, Darrell Torrian. I spoke to Darrell about the library and later to Oakham's then headmaster, Nigel Lashbrook. Also, the head of drama, Julie Norrell. And I asked all of them, what is so special about the Oakham ethos?
I came across a quote by Balzac where he effectively said that the world belongs to me because I understand it. And I think the mission, the reason why a school library exists is to help people understand themselves in the world that they live in. And I think for a secondary school library in particular, that is primarily through informational texts. So texts that explain the best understanding that we have of the world and how it works. But crucially, I think that includes recreational reading, so fiction. Helps children and young people understand the world and their place in the world and their relationship with other people in the world.
It's when you remove boundaries and you enable young minds to take ideas, to develop their own ideas, to link in with other people's ideas, but they're not artificially being restricted by a teacher, by an academic subject. And the arts, the creative and performing arts in the curriculum today offer that opportunity because there is a freedom of expression. You see it all the time. You walk around the school, you see it happening in the theatre, you see it happening in the art school, you see it happening in design as well, where young people can, working together or individually, they can push things in different directions.
In this school we're really lucky because from lower one up to third form everyone has a period of drama and dance on the timetable every week.
Goodness gracious.
Which is phenomenal. And I think we are one of very few schools that do that, because we see the value of looking at the world through the lens of theatre and dance and improvisation and movement and all those things. And the obvious benefits are that the students have a confidence, they have an ability to be able to present themselves physically and vocally. And that's almost a sort of a byproduct of the ability to explore the world.
I once taught primary school children for 10 years of my life, and I learned a great deal from these children. I learned that Joseph Beuys was completely right in saying that everyone is an artist, because every single child in the primary school draws, paints, sings, dances, expresses themselves in a kind of world of play, playfulness, and I know that they are somehow being creative. And secondary school comes along.
Yeah, it takes.
Then something horrible happens. Right. They're judged by examinations.
That's right.
I mean, how can you replace whatever it is, that wonderful energy of the child, with what is a so-called educational process?
I wonder whether it might be because, if you're somebody, you're trying to be a teacher, or you're trying to run the arts, dealing with emotions is a tricky thing that you can't. It's a very it's a very relative thing. In a way, it's much easier just to have standards and rules, and so you do that with education. And maybe also that's what happens in the art world, that with conceptualism that we have, where the idea is rather more than any idea of emotion. The benefit of that is that you can organise it, you can order it. You don't have any opinions at all because you're dealing with ideas, and these ideas can just be. You can measure how well the artist is responding to the ideas, and then you don't have to have any sort of any other feelings and emotions in it. And maybe bureaucrats like having conceptualism. And maybe that's one reason why we've moved away from what you were saying, from the art to the artifact.
David Hockney continually says that the Chinese knew exactly how art comes into being. It's the balance between mind, heart, and hand. Mm-hmm. One of the things that strikes me about art is that art is something made through the transference of energy from the human being through the fingertips, through the hands, through the sculpture, manipulating material. It's through the sound made by the pianist playing the great music of Bach and whatever. It's the human hand has got to be evident, as you've got to feel that this thing called art, whatever it is, it could be a painting or a sculpture or a piece of music or something written in a manuscript or written in a diary. It's the result of the human hand.
Maybe what it is, Ricky, what about money? See, money comes into this. When you're running a festival, you've always got to think about money side of things. So to what extent do you feel that has been a problem with how has that affected the way that the art world has moved? Would you say?
Well, I do believe that the first Lord Provost of Edinburgh, who had the honour of being the patron of the festival, of Edinburgh, he said that the festival was in no way a commercial venture. Well, what did he mean by that? He meant it could not be measured in either monetary or in terms of buying and selling. You cannot buy and sell love. You cannot buy and sell truth. You cannot buy and sell whatever we call prayer or contemplation. I think all great art, all enduring art, aspires to the condition of prayer. I see that there is no doubt that I need to communicate my innermost fears, hopes, aspirations, ideals, value systems with you. I want to share it with you. I want you to share your hopes with me. And I think the only way we can do it is through the language of the arts.